When we picture a psychological predator, our minds instantly default to the cinematic stereotype. We look for the person dominating the boardroom.
Right, the loud guy.
Exactly. The loud, boastful, completely selfie-obsessed individual who sucks the air out of every single room.
You're looking for the arrogance.
Yes, the grandiosity. And because we are so busy watching the front door for this, monster with a megaphone, we leave the back door wide open for something much more dangerous.
It's like you're looking for a broadsword in broad daylight, right?
Yeah.
And as a result, you are completely missing the sniper hiding in the shadows.
That's a terrifying way to put it, but yeah.
In behavioral profiling, we find that the most destructive psychological profiles, they don't announce their greatness. They don't demand you bow to them. Instead, they weaponize their fragility.
And as a clinical psychologist, I really have to emphasize this right out of the gate. Pathological narcissism is not excessive self-love.
Right.
That is, honestly, the greatest cultural myth we need to destroy before we go any further. Narcissism is a desperate, frantic survival strategy.
Yeah.
It's an invisible psychological operating system built entirely to protect a fragile, highly unstable self-worth from collapsing.
Oh.
So today we are looking at the covert narcissist, the vulnerable narcissist.
In my field, when we profile things like coercive control or deception or workplace manipulation, we are looking at behavioral matrices. And covert narcissists possess the exact same core traits as the grandiose narcissists.
The loud ones.
Exactly. They have that profound lack of empathy, the staggering entitlement, the grandiosity, but they deploy these traits through a completely different, highly camouflaged matrix.
Camouflaged with what?
With extreme vulnerability, shyness, and just perpetual victimization.
Okay, so the word covert is doing a lot of heavy lifting here. And I think it's where most people get tripped up, honestly.
Oh, absolutely.
Because covert doesn't necessarily mean they are consciously, deliberately sitting in a dark room, twirling a mustache, plotting to be sneaky.
Right, they aren't cartoon villains.
Exactly. It means their grandiosity is internalized.
That is a critical distinction to make. They do not declare their greatness to the world. Instead, they harbor this quiet, toxic, deeply held resentment that the world hasn't, inherently recognized their greatness.
That's like, how dare you not know how special I am?
Exactly. They believe they're special, misunderstood geniuses, and the fact that you haven't realized it is an insult they will punish you for on a daily basis.
So, if they aren't kicking the door down and throwing their weight around openly, how does this actually operate in everyday life? I mean, how does this psychological sniper actually take the shot?
Well, let's get into the disguise.
Let's do it.
It happens through a series of subtle, silent red flags that look like normal human struggles until you view them in aggregate.
Right.
We're talking about chronic victimhood. No matter what happens, no matter what conflict arises in a relationship or a workplace, they are always the wronged party. We're talking about selective memory, where their recollection of events always flawlessly supports their narrative of being slighted. And one of their most effective, insidious tools is fishing for compliments through self-deprecation.
Oh, the false humility. I see this in couples therapy all the time. One partner is exhausted, completely drained, and the other partner, the covert narcissist, is sitting there presenting as this wounded, highly sensitive soul.
Let's actually look at how that plays out in real time, because this is where the manipulation hides in plain sight. We need to do some behavioral forensics on a specific conversational dynamic, kind of line by line.
Okay, lay out the scenario.
Imagine this. You go to your partner or maybe a close friend, and you ask them for basic emotional support. You say, hey, I've been feeling really overwhelmed with work lately, and I just need you to be present for me tonight. I need a little support.
Which is a completely normal, healthy relational request. It's vulnerable, it's direct. I mean, it's what secure attachment looks like.
Right. And here is what the covert narcissist says in response. Wow, after everything I've done for you this week, this is how you treat me. I guess I'm just a terrible person. I can never do anything right.
Oh, man. The deflection is immediate.
Immediate.
On the surface, it sounds like genuine pain. They sound crushed. But if we dissect the forensics of that, what was actually meant there?
What was meant is, your needs are a threat to my spotlight.
Wow.
You asking for support requires me to decenter myself, and I am incapable of doing that. Therefore, I will now punish you for making that demand.
That is, that's chilling when you break it down like that.
And notice the transactional language embedded in their response. After everything I've done for you, they're keeping a ledger.
And think about the emotional response that is targeted in the person who just asked for help. It's guilt.
Right.
Immediate, overwhelming, disorienting guilt. Suddenly you're backpedaling. You are retracting your needs entirely.
Look at the invisible transaction that just took place. What dependency was created in that exact moment? You are instantly forced into the role of the rescuer.
Yeah.
You now have to validate their worth to calm them down. You find yourself saying, no, you're not a terrible person. I didn't mean that. You do so much for me. I'm sorry you even brought it up.
The power shift is absolute. The conversation is no longer about your needs.
Yeah.
It is entirely 100% about their victimhood.
Exactly.
The emotional oxygen in the room has been completely vacuumed up by their fragility.
That is the covert operating system executing flawlessly. They maintained their dominance, they neutralized your needs, and they extracted validation from you, all while playing the victim.
I have to push back here for a second, though.
Go for it.
Because as a clinician, I see major depressive disorder, generalized anxiety, complex PTSD. What you just described sounds a lot like someone who is profoundly insecure or depressed.
Right.
In fact, many covert narcissists end up in therapy misdiagnosed with treatment-resistant depression. So how do we differentiate between a depressed partner who is just struggling and a covert narcissist executing this matrix?
It's a great question. It's actually the most common misidentification in the profiling world, and it's why victims stay for decades. The key differentiator, the absolute litmus test, is accountability and reciprocity.
Okay, say more about that.
Genuine depression involves inward blame. A person with severe depression blames themselves, sometimes taking responsibility for things entirely beyond their control. They feel like a burden. They genuinely care about how their struggles affect you.
Yes, they feel terrible for bringing you down.
Covert narcissism, however, directs blame entirely outward. They hold you responsible for their unhappiness while positioning themselves as the victim of your supposed cruelty.
That is perfectly aligned with what we see in the clinical literature, especially regarding low self-esteem. Because someone with genuine low self-esteem, they build confidence when you give them support. You reassure them, you love them, and over time, it actually helps. The needle moves.
But not with a covert narcissist.
No. A covert narcissist's need for reassurance is a bottomless black hole. No amount of support is ever enough because the core structure is broken. And the empathy, it only flows in one direction, and that's toward themselves.
Which brings us to a major escalation point in understanding of this pathology. We really have to talk about the layperson fallacy.
Oh, yes. This is one of the most fascinating studies in recent personality research. So there was this study, it was an N of 177 evaluating lay theories of narcissism.
Basically looking at how normal people view this stuff.
Exactly. It looked at how everyday people intuitively understand these behaviors. It found that people use a very standard heuristic, a mental shortcut. We assume that grandiose behavior, the loud guy in the boardroom, is driven by feelings of superiority.
Makes sense.
And we assume that vulnerable, shy, self-deprecating behavior is driven by feelings of inferiority. It's logical, right? This is what it seems.
But the chilling reality of the covert narcissist is the exact opposite.
Yes.
Their fragility is a smokescreen. They harbor intense, burning feelings of superiority that are merely masked by overt fragility.
Which is wild to think about.
You are not dealing with someone who genuinely feels less than. You are dealing with someone who feels like an unrecognized god.
An unrecognized god. That completely reframes the entire interaction.
Right.
Because if they feel like an unrecognized deity, how do they extract the worship they believe they deserve without ever asking for it directly? Because asking for it would expose the grandiosity.
And that brings us to the concept of narcissistic supply. We hear that term thrown around on social media a lot, TikTok and Instagram, but we need to define it rigorously.
Please do.
For a narcissist, validation isn't a desire, it's physiological, it's psychological oxygen.
Right, because their self-esteem is entirely contingent on external mirroring. They do not have an internal mechanism to generate self-worth. Without constant external feedback telling them they are special, they face identity fragmentation.
Which is terrifying for them.
They literally feel like they're falling apart. They cease to exist in their own minds.
So if you apply this to dating or marriage or the workplace, it explains their entirely indirect approach. Because the covert narcissist lacks extroversion, and because they are fundamentally terrified of rejection, they can't stand on a desk and demand attention like a grandiose narcissist would.
The grandiose narcissist says, "Look at me, I'm the best."
Right. The covert narcissist says, "Nobody appreciates me, my life is so hard." They use passive-aggressive enactments. They use the sob story as a tool. They force you to validate them by presenting as uniquely, profoundly wounded, like my pain is deeper than anyone else's pain.
Wow. This perfectly explains the dynamic of walking on eggshells, which is perhaps the most universal symptom reported by partners of covert narcissists.
Absolutely.
The victim, the partner, the child, the employee. They constantly second-guess their own perception of reality. They become hypervigilant. Why? Because the covert narcissist maintains entirely different compartmentalized images.
The dual persona is striking. They have this humble, sweet, self-effacing public persona. Everyone in your social circle, maybe even your own family, thinks they are the kindest, most sensitive soul. You hear people say, oh, he's so quiet, he's so gentle.
Right.
But their private behavior with you, behind closed doors, is cold, dismissive, antagonistic, and deeply critical.
So if we evolve with the sniper analogy for a second, the grandiose narcissist attacks you with a broadsword in broad daylight in the middle of the town square. Everyone sees it. If you bleed, everyone says, wow, that guy with the broadsword is a menace, get away from him.
Yeah.
But the covert narcissist shoots you from the shadows, and when you start bleeding, they step out of the shadows, looking horrified and complain that your bleeding is ruining their shoes.
Wow, that is exactly it.
And to the outside world, you look crazy for being upset with this poor, sensitive person who is just trying to help you. The cognitive dissonance for the victim is agonizing.
That cognitive dissonance points to a structural reality of the relationship. The relationship with a covert narcissist is structurally sadomasochistic.
Okay, that is a highly clinical, very heavy term. We really need to break that down carefully because we aren't talking about physical dynamics here. We're talking about emotional architecture.
Exactly. Vulnerable narcissists experience human connection strictly in terms of power dynamics. There is no true mutuality.
Meaning?
They don't view you as an equal partner. They vacillate wildly between trying to dominate you, controlling your time, your emotions, your reality, and submissively surrendering to you to avoid abandonment when they feel they've pushed you too far. They manage this power dynamic using a psychological mechanism called projective identification.
I really want to spend some time on projective identification because it is one of the most complex but vital concepts in psychoanalysis. It was first introduced by Melanie Klein. It is not just simple projection. Simple projection is, I feel angry, I can't handle feeling angry, so I accuse you of being angry.
Which is basic.
Right. Projective identification is an active interpersonal manipulation. The narcissist has intolerable feelings, let's say, a deep, unbearable sense of inadequacy or intense sadistic rage. They don't just project it onto you. They behave in a way that forces you to feel those feelings and act them out. They induce the emotion in you.
It's an emotional framing. They poke, they prod, they passively aggressively withhold affection, they make subtle undermining comments. They play the victim. They do this relentlessly until you, who might be a very calm, reasonable, emotionally regulated person, finally lose your temper.
You snap.
You snap, you yell, you might even slam a door.
And the trap snaps shut.
The trap snaps shut. The moment you lose your temper, their posture changes entirely. They step back, they look terrified, their voice gets small, and they point to you as the abuser. Why are you screaming at me? I'm just trying to help. You're so volatile.
Oh my God.
They have successfully induced a sadistic response in you so they can comfortably, justifiably occupy the role of the innocent, masochistic victim. It is a masterful, deeply destructive transfer of psychological baggage. You are now carrying their rage, and they are carrying your innocence.
It's crazy making. The victim ends up apologizing for reacting to the abuse. So, okay, we've seen the disguise. We've forensically broken down the trap. The question that has to be burning in the listener's mind right now is, how is this psychological sniper forged in the first place?
Right.
What happened in their childhood to build this invisible operating system? Because nobody is born running a projective identification matrix.
No, they aren't. We have to look at the developmental blueprint. We're going deep into the unconscious drivers and the early origins. In behavioral analysis, we always trace the adaptation back to its original environment.
In clinical psychology, we trace this back to early relational trauma. Narcissism doesn't just happen because a parent bought a kid too many toys or told them they were special.
Another big myth.
Right. It's born from emotional neglect or a highly toxic, confusing mix of abuse and conditional overvaluation. If we look at two psychoanalytic titans, Heinz Kohut and Otto Kernberg, we see the dual nature of this wound.
Break those down for us.
So Kohut theorized that narcissism comes from missed mirroring. The child looks at the caregiver and doesn't see the gleam in the mother's eye. They aren't validated for who they actually are. Their genuine, authentic self is ignored.
So they get stuck.
Exactly. Their emotional development arrests. They become stuck, endlessly seeking that perfect mirroring from everyone else for the rest of their lives.
Kohut gives us the deficit model, but Otto Kernberg provides an even darker, more aggressive lens, which honestly often aligns closer to what we see in the behavioral forensics of these individuals.
The primitive fusion.
Yes. Kernberg theorized primitive fusion. To survive a childhood marked by parental coldness, latent envy, or hidden rage, the child builds a psychological fortress. They take their ideal self, their ideal object, meaning the perfect, loving parent they desperately wish they had, and their actual self, and they fuse them all together.
Wow.
They wall off the terrifying reality of their neglect behind a delusion of specialness and self-sufficiency. It's this core belief of, I don't need anyone because I am perfect.
So how does this map onto attachment theory? Because attachment styles are the current cultural buzzword, but they actually explain the mechanics of this manipulation perfectly. If Kernberg's primitive fusion is the internal architecture, what does the attachment behavior look like?
Well, research has shown, and we're talking about massive meta-analyses of over 10,000 participants, that while grandiose narcissists usually have an avoidant attachment style, where they pull away from intimacy and openly dismiss others.
Vulnerable narcissists are different.
Very different. They consistently exhibit insecure, preoccupied, or highly disorganized attachment. Specifically, a fearful avoidant presentation. They are terrified of being alone, but equally terrified of being engulfed or controlled by intimacy.
Let's look at a disturbing but clinically very common case example to ground this. Imagine a child whose primary caregiver is wildly unpredictable. One day, the caregiver is cruel, critical, neglectful, or overtly abusive. The child is terrified.
Right.
The next day, the caregiver is smothering the child with conditional praise, treating them like a special, fragile genius, but only because the child's performance makes the parent look good to the outside world.
The child's nervous system is just constantly scrambling.
Exactly.
The child learns a devastating lifelong lesson. Asking for basic needs directly is highly unsafe. If I say I'm hungry or I'm sad, I might get hit or I might be ignored. But if I engineer a crisis, if I cry mysteriously, or if I play the victim, or if I pretend to be sick, I suddenly get that smothering conditional praise back.
They figure out the code.
Yes. They learn to use a sob story as a primary survival mechanism. They learn that vulnerability is a currency you trade for safety.
This leads to a really counterintuitive truth about intimacy when dealing with this profile. People with a purely disorganized attachment style, which we often see in borderline personality dynamics, they genuinely desire love, but they are terrified of it, so they push and pull.
Right.
The covert narcissist, however, seeks relationships not for love, not for mutual connection, but purely to satisfy their narcissistic needs.
I don't want a partner in the traditional sense. They want a self-object.
A self-object. I love that term. It's cohood again. They view you the way you view an appliance.
An appliance.
Think about it. You view a thermostat based entirely on its utility. You only interact with a thermostat to regulate the temperature in your house. If the house is cold, you turn it up. If it's hot, you turn it down. You don't care about the thermostat's feelings.
No, of course not.
You don't ask about the thermostat's day. A covert narcissist only interacts with you to regulate their self-esteem.
Yeah.
You are a biological thermostat for their fragile ego.
But this raises a profound behavioral question. If they are constantly seeking regulation from others, if they are entirely dependent on these appliances, what happens inside their brain, inside their physiological system, when the appliance doesn't work?
When you don't do what they want.
Exactly. What happens when they don't get exactly what they want?
This is where we move into the internal war zone of the covert narcissist, and we have fascinating scientific findings here. We use a tool called the Emotion Regulation Questionnaire, or ERQ, to measure how people handle distress.
Okay.
Unlike grandiose narcissists who just express their anger outward or completely dismiss negative feedback, covert narcissists rely heavily on emotional suppression.
Because they are deeply paranoid. If you look at the psychometrics, the mistrust subscale of vulnerable narcissism is through the roof. They constantly anticipate humiliation. They believe if they show their true entitled demands, if they actually say, I deserve to be treated like a king, they will be rejected and laughed at. So they suppress it. They smile tightly. They play the martyr.
But suppression has a massive, measurable cognitive and physiological cost. They lack cognitive reappraisal, the ability to reframe a negative event adaptively. So the anger just sits there, boiling.
Which is exhausting.
It leads to severe cognitive fatigue, It leads to cardiovascular arousal. Their heart rate is literally pounding while they're sitting there pretending to be fine.
There is a brilliant clinical study out of Ohio State Lama that perfectly illustrates this internal war zone. It's actually one of my favorite studies for understanding the pathology.
The college essay one.
Yes, researchers gathered a group of individuals scoring high in vulnerable narcissism. They had them write essays about their adjustment to college. Then, the researchers, playing the role of anonymous judges, gave them deliberately negative, unsatisfactory feedback on their essays.
A direct narcissistic injury.
Oh.
A direct threat to the unrecognized God.
Exactly. Now, what the researchers were looking for was how these individuals regulated that injury. The vulnerable narcissists tried to do what grandiose narcissists do. They tried to mentally discount the judges.
Right.
They tried to tell themselves, these judges are idiots. They don't know what they're talking about. I don't care about their opinion anyway.
But the result was a catastrophic failure of emotion regulation.
It backfired entirely. In grandiose narcissists, discounting the judge's works, they move on. But for the covert narcissists, their attempt to minimize the feedback resulted in a paradoxical, massive spike in subjective shame.
Wow.
They failed to convince themselves they didn't care. They couldn't reappraise it because the absolute truth of their operating system is that they care entirely too much about external validation. Without it, they are nothing.
And what's fascinating from a behavioral standpoint is how that suppressed, boiling shame detonates. It doesn't stay as just internal shame. It transforms. It mutates into entitlement rage, or, as the clinical literature calls it, shamrage.
I can hear people asking, okay, but we all get angry when we're criticized. How is shamrage different from normal anger?
It is fundamentally different. Grandiose narcissists use instrumental aggression. It's cold, it's calculated, it's used to assert dominance. If you challenge a grandiose narcissist in a meeting, they will systematically dismantle your argument to prove they are the boss. It's a tool.
Right.
Vulnerable narcissists experience uncontrollable, dysregulated rage. It is disproportionate, it is destructive, and it is almost always misdirected.
Because they lack the courage to scream at the boss who actually criticized them, they suppress it at work, they come home, and the pressure valve blows. They scream at their partner, their child, or a service worker over a misplaced fork or a mildly delayed text message.
Let's slow down and look at the actual forensics of shamrage, because it operates in a highly predictable, rapid 6-step cycle.
Let's do it.
Step 1, the entitled expectation. They walk into a room or a situation silently expecting to be recognized as special or catered to.
Okay, that's the setup.
Step 2, the injury. Someone ignores them or offers a slight critique or just fails to read their mind and offer the exact right compliment.
And then comes the explosion.
Step 3 is the entitlement rage.
Oh.
This is the explosion, the disproportionate screaming, the cruel remarks, the throwing of objects. But the crucial part is what happens immediately after the explosion.
Step 4. Intense, suffocating shame, but not shame for hurting you.
No.
It's shame over their own dependency.
Yeah.
They realize they just threw a massive tantrum because they desperately needed your approval. The mask of the self-sufficient, sensitive victim just slipped, exposing the demanding, fragile toddler underneath, and they are horrified by their own exposure.
Which leads directly to step 5,
Mm.
social withdrawal and rumination. They retreat. They lock themselves in the bedroom. They sulk.
Right?
And during this withdrawal, they are actively rewriting the narrative of what just happened so they can be the victim again. I only yelled because you pushed me so hard. You made me act like that.
And finally, step 6. Seeking a new, low-stakes victim for validation. They realize the primary source is currently burned, so they go find a coworker or a friend who doesn't know what just happened, and they extract sympathy from them. My partner was so awful to me this morning.
They use that fresh sympathy to rebuild their shattered mask.
Exactly. But shamrage is just what happens when they are slighted. It's what happens when the mask gets a little scratch. What happens when the mask isn't just scratched, but entirely ripped off.
Right.
What happens when they are exposed completely? What is the covert narcissist's absolute greatest fear?
Now we are entering the deepest hidden layer of the pathology. We're talking about narcissistic mortification.
This is a concept originally introduced by Freud and later deeply expanded by psychoanalyst Ludwig Heidelberg. Narcissistic mortification is the primitive terror of self-dissolution. It is, quite literally, death by embarrassment.
When a covert narcissist is exposed, say, they are caught in a massive undeniable lie, or they suffer a catastrophic public failure that they cannot spin into a victim narrative, or a partner finally sees through them and states the truth clearly. They don't just feel bad. They experience somatic flooding.
Like a physical reaction.
Patients who have experienced mortification describe it as a profound physical event. Burning skin, a crushing chest pain that slowly expands, intense dizziness, nausea, blanching. The nervous system goes into absolute shock. It is an existential dread,
Wow.
a feeling of narcissistic annihilation. Because their false self is their only self, when the false self collapses, they feel as though their very identity is being erased. They are falling into a void.
If we look at this from a profiling angle, this is the psychological equivalent of cornering a wounded, panicked animal. When the grandiose false self collapses entirely, the psyche is suddenly flooded with what psychoanalysts call destrudo, the self-destructive impulse.
Right, destrudo. It's the opposite of libido, which is the life force, the creative, connective energy. Destrudo is the raw impulse to destroy, to obliterate, to reduce things to ash.
And because they are in a state of absolute terror and dissolution, they have to reclaim control through destruction. They cannot apologize normally.
An apology requires a cohesive core self that can tolerate being wrong, saying, I made a mistake, I am still me, I will do better. They do not have that core self.
Right. To recover from mortification, they must externalize the destruction. They must either temporarily destroy you, the person who witnessed their unmasking, because if they destroy your credibility, their unmasking didn't happen, or they engage in a sickening, dramatic display of self-debasement.
Which unveils a major psychological mystery that so many partners of covert narcissists face. We often hear about covert narcissists threatening suicide during arguments. It's a terrifying, traumatizing experience for the partner. But you have to understand the clinical mechanics of it. Suicidality in vulnerable narcissism during a mortification event is rarely just depressive despair.
No, it is the ultimate manipulation tactic. But more profoundly, it is a defensive restoration of grandiosity. It is the ultimate taking back of control.
How so?
The logic is, you cannot destroy me, you cannot expose me, because I will destroy myself. I hold the ultimate power over life and death. I am the god of this situation.
It stops the argument instantly. It forces you completely back into the rescuer role. It entirely erases whatever terrible thing they did to cause the mortification in the first place, because now you are just trying to keep them alive.
Right.
You are calling therapists. You are hiding pills. The original issue is dead and buried, and they are back in the center of the universe.
This raises a real-time debate in our fields regarding the fluidity of these personality structures. Can a covert narcissist change under that kind of extreme, mortifying stress? Do they adapt?
This is a shocking insight from contemporary dissociative models of personality.
Yeah.
Under extreme mortification, the covert narcissist can literally shapeshift.
Shapeshift.
Because they don't have a solid core self, their personality is somewhat modular. They can transition into entirely different self states to survive the exposure. They may drop down into a borderline self state, exhibiting desperate, frantic clinging, sobbing on the floor, terrified of abandonment.
Or even more dangerously, and I see this in forensics frequently, they can transition into a secondary psychopathic state.
The vulnerability vanishes instantly.
Instantly. The tears stop, their face goes blank, and they become cold, vindictive, and criminally aggressive. They will burn the house down, literally or metaphorically, to ensure you don't survive their humiliation. They will destroy your career, take your children, bankrupt you, all with a chilling lack of emotion.
It's a terrifying realization of how fluid and dangerous this operating system can be. We've dissected the anatomy of the pathology down to its core mechanics. But how does this invisible operating system function on a macro scale?
Like in society.
Yeah, how does it exist in society, in our culture? And more importantly, how do you escape it?
If we apply this framework to leadership, to religious communities, or to workplace politics, the pattern is everywhere, hiding in plain sight. Think about cult leaders.
Okay.
We often assume cult leaders are purely grandiose, the charismatic guy on the stage demanding money. But many of the most destructive, long-lasting cult leaders utilize covert narcissism. They externalize their own dependency and shame onto their followers. They present as the ultimate suffering martyr.
Look how much I sacrifice for you.
Exactly. Look how the world misunderstands me and persecutes me. I bear this burden for you. This induces a displaced sense of profound shame, guilt, and indebtedness in the followers, making them perfectly controllable. The followers police themselves to ensure they don't upset the delicate martyr.
You know, literature and pop culture have actually been trying to warn us about this specific profile for over a century. We just didn't have the clinical vocabulary for it.
Oh, for sure.
Think of Dostoevsky's notes from Underground. The underground man is the ultimate humiliated covert narcissist. He has a contracted, miserable self-image. He is filled with self-loathing, yet he wears a facade of intellectual superiority and belittles everyone around him.
And critically, when he is met with genuine empathy from Liza, the prostitute, when she actually offers him unconditional love, he doesn't heal.
No.
He experiences mortification. Her love exposes his brokenness, and he lashes out to destroy her, to protect his ego.
It's brilliant. We see it in Philip Roth's aging protagonists, too, who experience mortification triggered by the loss of youth and sexual potency, leading to a total destructive collapse of their identity. Even in modern cinema, look at Patrick Bateman in American Psycho.
Oh, yes.
We label him a psychopath, but beneath the mask, he displays extreme, thin-skinned, narcissistic vulnerability.
The business card scene is the perfect example of this.
Yes. Let's analyze that through the lens of mortification.
Okay, so Bateman and his colleagues are comparing business cards. Should be a meaningless interaction. But when Paul Allen shows his card, which has a slightly better font, a subtle watermark, Bateman doesn't just get jealous. Look at the physical reaction.
He starts sweating.
His hands tremble. He looks like he's going to faint. That is somatic flooding. That is narcissistic mortification. His entire self-worth is entirely contingent on that external superiority. The better business card triggers an existential collapse, a literal threat to his survival.
And his eventual violence is a mortification response, defending against that overwhelming shame using Descrudo.
Which brings us to the most painful, unresolved question for anyone dealing with this in the real world, not in a movie. The question every victim, every partner, every child of a covert narcissist asks, can they be fixed?
Can a covert narcissist be cured?
If I just love them enough, if I just find the right therapist, if I just explain it the right way.
The therapeutic reality is grim, but absolutely necessary to understand if you want to reclaim your life. Modalities like schema therapy or mentalization-based treatment do exist, and in highly controlled settings with incredibly willing participants, they can make dents. But there is a massive, almost insurmountable roadblock.
The core defense mechanism.
The very operating system we've been describing prevents them from taking genuine accountability.
To actually heal, a narcissist must undergo the process of transforming mortification into manageable shame. They have to learn to mentalize. They have to learn to tolerate feeling inadequate, feeling wrong, or feeling average without collapsing into dysregulated rage or total victimhood. They have to build an internal sense of self-reliance.
And it is a deeply, profoundly painful process. It requires walking through the fire of their own inadequacy, and the vast majority simply refuse to endure it. They will quit therapy the very moment the therapist stops validating their victimhood and starts holding them accountable.
They'll claim the therapist doesn't understand them.
Or is abusive.
Yeah.
And they will leave to find a new source of supply.
If we map out the emotional journey you, the listener, have just taken with us during this investigation, you likely started with curiosity about a clinical term. Then, as we outline the subtle red flags, the false humility, the text message forensics, you probably moved to suspicion.
Perhaps recognizing a coworker, a parent, a sibling, or an ex-partner.
Then came the unease and shock of understanding the sadomasochistic dynamic, the projective identification, the true mechanics of shamerage. And now, hopefully, as we strip the mystery away, you are arriving at empowerment.
True healing for the victim of a covert narcissist isn't about finally finding the magic words to make the narcissist understand the pain they've caused. They do not have the hardware to process that. You were trying to run a modern program on a broken operating system.
Right.
True healing is a realization. They have their work to do, and you have yours. The most powerful thing you can do is to differentiate. Step off the emotional roller coaster. Stop trying to manage their fragile ego. Stop accepting the guilt they project onto you. Become the more emotionally mature person. You have to stop being their psychological oxygen.
You now possess the manual. You've seen the X-ray of an invisible, shame-driven predator. You understand the weaponized vulnerability, the projective identification, the desperate, frantic avoidance of mortification. It is a tragic, destructive loop, but is no longer invisible to you.
You know how to read the hidden code. You know what's happening behind the mask. But before you go out and start profiling everyone in your life, I want to leave you with one final, provocative thought. I want you to turn that investigative lens inward. Ask yourself, have you ever used self-deprecation not because you genuinely felt small, but because you secretly demanded that the people around you rush in to tell you how big you actually are? Have you ever played the victim to avoid apologizing? We all have a shadow. We all have moments of narcissistic vulnerability and manipulation. The difference between having a shadow and being consumed by it is whether we have the courage to look at it, to own it, or whether we let it operate us in the dark.